All righty, and now we will share the screen. And here we go. We'll minimize that. Get that up and out of the way and get today's ball or globe rolling. Okay, good morning. Happy Sunday, July 25th. And it's good to be with all of you. Looking forward to very much the whole day together. So what we are doing in our adult Sunday school class, and today's going to be a big day. We're going to be crossing over some milestones with our events here. Our overall theme has been the seekings of man versus the unchanging goodness of our God. And today we're going to see that in the book of Habakkuk. If you'd like to find your way there, we'll be there, but we'll be in other scriptures before Habakkuk. So the time frame we're talking is Genesis 10 and 11, going through the Bible story. It's the 2400s BC. We are in the post-Babel world. So the results of the Tower of Babel are continuing to unfold. Peleg, who was born shortly after and named for it, he is growing up and we're seeing the world he grew up in. You've got 5 generations alive now. Noah's son Shem still alive, on down to Peleg, 5 generations. We're specifically looking at the descendants of Ham, but we're not limited to that. We'll see some others. And basically what I'm doing is I'm taking us on a visual tour of who the big powers and bigwigs are, the powers that be in these different nations and city-states that are in the world at the time Peleg is growing up, and as we're moving closer and closer to everything spiritually exploding under Abraham, God's call and promise with him, his trek to Egypt, and everything that comes from that, foreshadowing Israel and Egypt and all that that means for us. So with that, let me first go to this screen right here. Kind of set the stage for this visual tour we're going to be taking through the leaders of the world and get to know some of them a little bit as Peleg is growing up in all this. So here's Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iran, Iraq, Iran, on down, Syria up here. Canaan is the nation, will be the nation of Israel over there. So right now, where we are picking up today, over here in the land of Shinar, land of Sumer, the land of the 2 rivers, Mesopotamia, in the city-state of Uruk, where Nimrod was king and where he did everything from, his grandson Dumuzi is currently king of Uruk. A little further up here in Kish, about 11 miles outside of Babylon, which doesn't exist yet, Kish has got 2 lines of rulers. One king is named Ariam, which means male gazelle. The other king is Idil-Sadom. Probably one's a priest king, one's another more civil king. And over here in Egypt, we are now in the 3rd dynasty, the 3rd line of rulers in the united whole nation of Egypt. And this 3rd dynasty changed everything. We are now in what's officially called the Old Kingdom. There are 3 big phases for Egypt: the Old, the Middle, and the New. Old Kingdom, Pyramid time. Middle Kingdom, Joseph and Moses and art and all of that stuff. And then the 3rd kingdom is when they do a lot of territorial expansion and really embolden and empower themselves. So we're the beginning of this middle kingdom here under Pharaoh Zoser. So we're going to take a look, pick up where we left off last week. I want to hit a couple highlights. So let's start with this one right here. So this is a big picture of what's been happening and what we're looking at in the world and in the Bible. The bottom is the world timeline, the top is the Bible timeline. This is a screenshot from a video that's available on YouTube by Nathan Hoffman. He's got some great ones out there, and I've adapted it for us. So the flood in Noah's day, he ballparked it at 3000 BC. I put the Bible specific date of 2893 BC because that's the nerd that I am, and to just kind of help us out. So he had 150 years here. I erased the one and shortened it to 100 years to make up for the shaving of 100 years there. So it all does still work out. So we go from the flood in Noah's day, the world repopulates over 400 years. We get the Tower of Babel, nations spread all over the earth. 50 years later, we get the step pyramid at Saqqara, ballpark 2450 BC. First pyramid on earth is the pyramid of Djoser, this pharaoh of the third dynasty. And then not long after that, we get the famous Great Pyramids of Giza that we'll see as we go along. So long story short, I know, too late. Long story short, the Bible, what we're told in the Bible, and what happened in the world around us that we see with our own eyes fit as it always does. And these are the things, this is the world that these names that we see in the Bible, this is what's around them. This is what's happening. These are the newsmakers of their day. So from there, let's go to a little further down. This is that first pyramid. See how small the people are down here. This thing's about 20 stories tall. It's called the step pyramid because, as you see, they built one layer, then they said, hey, that's good, let's build another. So they did a shorter one and they stacked it up. 6 total layers, again, about 20 stories tall. Like other pyramids, it was actually smooth on the outside, had an outer casing that was polished and shined, but robbers, plundered stuff. And so this is what we see underneath that. So that's the step pyramid of Djoser that's been built at this time. Here we see intricate look at some wood. And I brought this out last week. That is a picture that I took. I didn't take this in Egypt. I took this in the Missoula airport as I was leaving last year from the meeting. This is a display they had in the airport that is actually not wood. This is their display. It says up there, not wood. And so this was a sales thing showing, hey, you can get this wood looking stuff. Why did I care about this a year ago? Because I knew, I didn't know when, that I'd be teaching this. Inside Djoser's pyramid, everything is stone made to look like wood. Because what they did, why would they carve stone to make it look like wood? Because this was a permanent thing, still with us today, to represent the earthly thing that they had when Djoser was alive. This is now a permanent thing for Djoser's spirit to carry on and continue all his rituals that he did in the earthly one while he was on this. So they made a permanent thing, and this was the masterpiece of his vizier, his right-hand man, Imhotep, is the guy who designed all this. He also did a lot with medicine and discoveries as well. So that was that world. And this is the pyramid that's been built and all that's going on with that. But another thing we saw from this pharaoh and others in his time frame, we see not only was the stone made to look like wood, but also the columns were specifically fluted to look like the stem of a certain plant. And that plant happens to be the yellow long-stemmed lily that is not found anywhere in Egypt. Remember, everything and everyone comes from somewhere. These foreigners are not native Egyptians. These pharaohs are not native Egyptians. They come from Noah. They come from Mesopotamia, the land of Shinar. So we see here, this is the ceremonial looking mace head on the staff of the Scorpion King, and it's got that lily right there. So, okay, that's cool for Egypt, but it actually comes from this right here. There it is again. This is from Mesopotamia. So they brought the lily, the flower of home, from home to Egypt and had to specially cultivate it. And this was something only the pharaohs and those could afford to do. So this is their very special symbol of their identity and their coming home. In Hebrew, the word for that specific lily is sheshem. And that is where we get our name, Susan, that lily, that flower of home. And that brings us to where we actually, last thing we looked at last week. This is not the cover of Journey's new album. I know. But I just heard on the radio that Styx has a problem, but that's another journey across the abyss, all that stuff. So we see the boat here, and the boat is made of wood, but it's made in the shape of those reed boats that are tied up together at the top. We see the winged beetle with the disc going up towards the sun. Like I asked last week, did you ever stop to think what journey the band Journey is named for? This is it. The journey of the Pharaoh across the underworld to his resurrection. That's the journey, all the imagery that is on all the album covers of the band Journey, that's the imagery they're taking. That's what this is that journey. It's actually a part of that resurrection cycle. It's a return to the Persian Gulf, where they came from. The Pharaoh goes along the dark river of the underworld to the island of Bahrain, where we saw all those burials earlier. And that's where their gods came from. There he joins Noah, or so they think in their mythology. They call him Utnapishtim, Noah the far distant. He's the first of the Horotheids, the falcon, sky god. That's who they're looking to. And he's a descendant of their high god Atum, A-T-U-M. Sounds a lot like Adam. So yeah, everything comes from somewhere. And that beetle is pushing the sun god up to rise to the horizon, excuse me. And so now moving on to new things this week. So Bahrain takes us back to Eridu. Why were they so excited about Bahrain? Because that very name means two waters. In Bahrain, you could dive off the coast in the north into the salt water, and underneath you have fresh water. Over here in Eridu, where you had the salt waters of the Persian Gulf, you had sweet waters from the rivers meeting. So any place where you had that meeting of the two types of water was a holy place. This is also where that bird landed on the reeds and told Cain's son Enoch, hey, this is a special place, build a temple here. 17 temples later, that's the exact site of the Tower of Babel under Nimrod. So Bahrain harkens back to Eridu, where they all came from. In our Bibles, that's Irad, the city that Cain's son Enoch named for his son Irad. So Enoch and so Eridu and Uruk are two big cities there. Uruk is the city mentioned in the Bible that Cain built for his son Enoch. It's called Uruk. It's where the nation Iraq gets its name. So that gets its name from Uruk, which gets its name from Enoch, Adam's grandson. Everything comes from somewhere. So moving on now, again, I'm going to take us on a visual tour through the rulers of this day and time. Stop me at any time if anyone's lost, anyone's got any questions, or just needs to pause and take a breath and take it all in. Nothing we have to remember here, just giving us some exposure to all that's going on in the life of, right now, Peleg, as he is growing up. So over in that city of Kish, we have a new ruler. His name is Enmi-Baragesi. What's exciting about this guy is what we have right here. This is a fragment of an alabaster bowl that's in the Baghdad Museum. And that right there is the first proof we have of a real person from this list of kings we have, the Sumerian king list. And so that list has a bunch of names. Well, here's one of the guys on that list right here. So showing that this is real stuff. This is a real guy, Enmi-Baragesi. So that type of writing doesn't look like hieroglyphs, because remember, languages are confused. So is the writing. Writing is different. Over here, even though it started kind of similar, this is that cuneiform where they would take a wedge, pen, and they would turn things and mark them with this wedge. So that's why it looks the way it does.
And how did they figure out this?
They figured this out because they had a lot to figure out on their own when they were confused and dispersed and separated according to their languages, the Bible tells us. And so they weren't spread out according to their ethnicity. They were spread out. There's a lot of diversity already. They are spread out according to their language. And as they pooled off into different areas based on language, that's when their DNA kind of pooled together and different, what we would call ethnic traits became manifested and isolated.
How did the scientists figure out that it was a different language and not just pictures?
Because, yes, what we have in different languages from Mesopotamia, Sumer, Shinar, we've got different languages, Semitic, East and West Semitic. We have Akkadian, which I was actually talking with Chris in Tehachapi when we went up there for the awarding of that certificate to that gentleman. And Ashley knows someone who also is educated and instructing in archaeology. And she mentioned Mount Behiston to me, and I got all excited. Mount Behiston, actually, when Cain and his descendants, Enoch and them were traveling on down, from Nod forward, they came past Mount Behiston. We have some Neolithic, New Stone Age remnants there. But what's really special about Mount Behiston is much further later, in the 600s BC, the very first king of Persia, Darius I, mentioned in the Bible with Daniel and all of that. He basically stopped some power struggles and announced himself as head honcho. He carved some life-size images on Mount Behiston. He had it done to himself, showing him taking charge, and the event is described in different languages. And so what we were able to do is take these different languages, put it together, and crack the code. And that's how we're able to determine how to read these different languages. So that was just like when French archaeologist Champion discovered the Rosetta Stone, and we were able to discover the key for translating Egyptian hieroglyphs. That's what Mount Behiston was for us with Akkadian, being able to translate that language and see how it all works out. Brother Clay. Yeah. Yeah. The word S-I-N, not sin, but sign S-I-N. No, we're not talking trigonometry. That word means Far East. The Far East, as in we call the land of China the Far East. The war between China and Japan was the Sino-Japanese War. Where is Mount Sinai? Well, Sinaites, as we trace back, their descendants from the Tower of Babel. Sinai is that word just means to the Far East. So when they crossed the Gulf of Aqaba, the Red Sea crossing, and they went to Mount Sinai, they went to the place that was further east. So it's not on the Sinai Peninsula. It's actually in Arabia, in Saudi Arabia, outside of Midian, where Moses spent 40 years, in fact, and was at the mountain of God before he got the Israelites and brought them back. So Far East is where that comes from. So not surprising that we're reminded of. Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that funny? I never understood, looking at a map, how Maryland is considered the South. You go across the longitude there, you're in Oregon or something. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. 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 Or in Marvel comic book mythology, Norse mythology before that, Asgard, Asia Garden. Troy was the capital of Midgard, the middle garden, because they knew it was middle, to your point about Midwest. So different regions, absolutely, developing their own ways as they are dispersed by God according to their languages. And then everything flows and develops from there as we continue on. So yeah, great question, Brother Clay. And yeah, that's how everything starts to unfold and play out as we go. So good stuff. So we have another pharaoh now in Egypt. His name is Zoser Teti, or Sekhemket, he's also known as. Not much of a pyramid here. Basically, this wasn't finished. Either he died suddenly or something else was going on. We just have this first step here for Pharaoh Sekhemket. And it's called the mastaba, that square thing. And that's the burial chamber, showing how unfinished it is for this Pharaoh Sekhemket from this time frame in the 2400s BC that we're looking at. Continuing our visual journey as we go through, we have another pharaoh. We call him Huzifa II, because he's not the first Huzifa. Now, from last week, don't expect anyone to remember it, because I wouldn't. Huzifa means missing or erased, because I'm not sure who this guy was. Yeah, exactly. Cancel culture, that's funny. Yeah. But there are some thoughts, and it seems to be a good fit, that this might be a guy known as Kaba. So let's take a look, start our field trip here. One thing Kaba did was called the layer pyramid, which is right here. Zoom in. There is our layer pyramid. Now, it certainly does not look like the other pyramids we've seen. So this is about 5 miles southwest of Giza. So this is made with mud bricks and layers around a core of rough blocks from the local bedrock. This was supposed to be 140, 150 feet tall, but now it's only about 56 feet tall. Not sure if part of the pyramid on the outside eroded, or like others, they just never finished it. So here is a snapshot of the layer pyramid. That from this guy Kaba, who might be this mystery guy, filling in the blank here on this time frame. This now brings us to the last pharaoh of the third dynasty. Aren't you excited? This guy's name is Huni. They don't know much about this guy. He's the last pharaoh of the third dynasty of Egypt, and that's him. So that ends the third dynasty. Now we are getting ready for exciting times, because we have finally crossed the threshold out of the 2400s BC. Did you feel that? And so now we are going to take a quick look. We'll discuss it anyway. The year 2393 BC. Why is that significant? We are now 500 years after the flood. What's so significant about that? According to Bodhi Hodge in his book on the Tower of Babel, atmospheric scientist named Mike Ord, also Dr. Larry Vardaman, whom we've seen in the Is Genesis history stuff. They are both looking at things. By both of their reckonings, the Ice Age peaked right now. 500 years after the flood is when we had the most water out of the oceans and on the snow, in the snow, as the snow and the glaciers and all that. So if this is the peak when there's the most water removed from the oceans, that means there's the most land exposed. Think land bridges, the Bering Strait across Russia to Alaska, talk about the Indians coming across and all that stuff. What's that? Atlantis, yeah. All these different things. And so this fits with the Tower of Babel dispersion, then being able to go out to all these places. Remember, I showed that place in Japan, that island just outside of Taiwan, where we saw pyramids underwater. Because at the time it wasn't underwater. They build and live there. Now it's submerged. And you can take classified boat tours and check it all out. So the Ice Age, the ice caps now start melting. Now the oceans start rising, which means this is normal. This is natural. This is expected. This is resettling after Noah's flood. So nothing freaky deaky in that. So now we're actually going to open our Bibles to Genesis chapter 11. In Genesis chapter 11, we are arriving at the year 2391 BC with the death of Shem, Noah's son, survivor of the flood. He dies at the age of 600. This is now 101 years after the Tower of Babel. So Genesis 11, verse 11. And Shem lived 500 years after he became the father of ARPACHSHAD, and he had other sons and daughters. So that 500 years has passed now. Shem was the last one recorded to live up to 600 years old. This is also from Nathan Hoffman. As we look at the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew that was done before the New Testament started, they did this around 200 BC, same time that the Dead Sea Scrolls were being written. We have that Septuagint. Our Bibles are translated from a copy of Hebrew from around 1000 AD. This is copied from Hebrew 1,000 years earlier. So some interesting differences. One of those differences is the age of the patriarchs when they become fathers. For a lot of them, it's exactly 100 years more. And that's confirmed by the writings of Josephus, also confirmed by the Pentateuch, of their first 5 books of the Bible. So when we do that, they would say like Shelah was 30 when he fathered Eber, and he was 34 when he fathered Peleg. No, it's actually 100 when they became, and 30, 134. So when we see how all that plays out, turns out right here that Shem died 500 years before Abraham was born. There's a theory out there that I used to believe that Shem was Melchizedek, whom Abraham meets, and that foreshadowing of Jesus Christ. Well, that clearly doesn't work. And also it's very good that it doesn't work, because Melchizedek is very unique, and we'll get to that when we get to that. And so Christ is very unique, being like Melchizedek. So that's some interesting stuff. So while we have the death and loss of Shem, we do have a birth of someone. We are now moving on from the generation of Peleg into the birth of his son, Reu. Now, I know that's kind of loud, but I'll get to it and explain it here. Move that over. Actually, move this over a little bit. Well, I moved the laptop and the projector doesn't do anything. Off the projector. There we go. Okay, so what we have here with the birth of Reu in Genesis, let's take a look at, first let's go to Genesis 10, 26 to 29, and his generation along with Genesis 10, 26 to 29. Peleg was a twin. His twin brother was Joktan. So in Genesis 10, 26, Joktan became the father of Almodad and Shelah and Harzamazeth and Jerah and Hadoram and Uzal and Diklah and Obal and Abimael and Sheba and Ophir and Havilah and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. Busy guy. We skip down to 31. So these are the sons of Shem, according to their families, according to their languages, by their lands, according to their nations. So all that's been laid out for us. Skip down to chapter 11, verse 18. So Genesis 11:18. Here's what we are told. And Peleg lived 130 years and became the father of Reu. He was actually 130 years old at that time. This is also, I'll read it. You can follow along if you like. This is also shared with us in First Chronicles, chapter 1. First Chronicles 1. Yes, please. Yeah. Yeah, all of ours do. Yeah, I was reading out of the Septuagint. What that is like I saw that prior slide here, is all of our Bibles, New American Standard, King James, New King James, they're translated from a copy of Hebrew that's called the Masoretic text. That copy dates to about the year 1000 AD. The Septuagint was when before the New Testament started in about 200 BC, they got together and took the Old Testament Hebrew and translated it into Greek. And now I have a modern English translation of that. In the Septuagint, which is 1,000 years early than the Hebrew our Bibles were copied from, they show that the age of the patriarchs was 100 years more than what we show in our Bibles at the time they became dads. So that pushes the timeline back 100 years for each one. So basically, the time, for example, in the Bibles we have, if you do the math, it looks like only 100 years between the flood and the Tower of Babel. It's actually 400 years in between the two, which makes a lot more sense and fits everything else. So it's not a typo, it's the source translation. Now, I thought the Bible was perfect and infallible. The original Hebrew as it was written, and the original Aramaic and the original Greek, absolutely 100%. Now, these differences in copies and translations, we know, we're aware of. And as we compare them together, we see the differences are minor. This is one of those differences. The Dead Sea Scrolls, when we look at those, they show and line up with the Septuagint. And so they confirm from that same time frame. So here's a question that comes up, and we'll get to this, especially with Melchizedek. Was that done on purpose? And there's a theory to that. Or was it done, just a copying with what they had at the time? It's just a minor difference. I'll go ahead and share now. One theory is that the Jews were so opposed to Christ being the new high priest, spiritually speaking, that they erased the one in front of those to shorten it so that they could claim Shem was Melchizedek. Therefore, he's of that line. So therefore, Christ can't be high priest because he's not of that line. So to dethrone Christ from his high priesthood is one theory that's out there. And a lot of Jews today would claim that Melchizedek and Shem were the same person. Therefore, Christ's high priesthood is invalid. But when we go back and see how it plays out, that's actually not a legitimate point or argument. So yeah, interesting. Controversy, conspiracy theories, crazy stuff out there.
Most people probably wouldn't put this together though, right?
Right.
I mean, a lot, not, I mean, okay, he was 30 and he had EBER, okay, and then I, move on. To the next thing.
Yeah, there's no doctrinal issues.
But
There's no.
you're talking about if it shifts the timeline to where if it goes by, like you said, there was only 100 years between the Tower of Babel and the flood.
Yeah.
That is kind of significant because you're
Yes.
right when you start looking at how they would populate.
Yes.
In 100 years, I mean, how many kids could they have? I mean, sure, but it does add more layers to it if there's a 400 year.
Yeah, absolutely.
For the people to be able to spread out throughout the earth, like you said, with the land bridges and stuff. So part of me is like, well, it's long, it's a round number. It's 100 years. So whether part of me thinks, well, it's insignificant, but then I guess if you're going a little bit deeper,
Exactly.
And then like you said, if it was done on purpose, I'd say that does sound almost like a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Because how many Bibles how many millions of Bibles have been printed with 30 years versus the 130 years?
Absolutely. And if anyone's interested, let me know. I'll be happy to get you the link, especially to 2 videos from Nathan Hoffman. They're about 30 minutes each, but they're really cool, really well done. One talks about the 430 years. Was it 430 years that they were all in Egypt, or 430 years from Abraham to Egypt? And that ties into this. And the other one's on the timing of the flood versus the pyramids. And that's where he mentions all of this.
Numbers are important in the Bible.
Absolutely.
Numbers are very important. And we might say, well, what does that have to do with Christ tea in China? Or what does that have to do with me today? But I do know enough to know that numbers are important, because as we move forward in time, it's what's going to be coming too. Numbers are very significant in what we're living now and what will be, the eventual return of Christ, so.
Absolutely.
So I do know numbers are important.
Yeah, so I'll close reading this from First Chronicles, then we'll move over to Habakkuk. So First Chronicles 1:20-23. Joktan became the father of Almodad, Shelah, Hazarmath, and Jerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Diklah, Ebal, Abel, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these are the sons of Joktan. This is the generation being born at this time. And Gilgamesh is also being born to Dumuzi in this generation. So let's go down to verse 25. Eber, Peleg, now Ru. Down to verse 39 and 40. The sons of Lotan were Horian, Homam, and Lotan's sister was Timnah. Sons of Shobal were Elian, Manahath, Ebal, Shephi, and Odom. Sons of Zibian were Aya and Anna. And verse 42. Sons of Ezer were Bilhan, Zavan, and Jachin. Sons of Dishan were Uz and Aaron. Okay, so we're going to close in Habakkuk. What we want to leave you with is this. This is where we're going from here, now that we're done with 2400s BC and the generation of Peleg. Now we're going to the lifetime of Ru. And one thing I learned here, when I move this out of the way for us, it doesn't move for those online or for the recording. I didn't know that. So yeah, so sorry for those online. What that says at the top there is Gilgamesh to Dumuzi. So Gilgamesh is Noah's great-great-great-great-grandson. And so through Nimrod. And so Ru is Abraham's great-great-grandpa. So we're getting closer to Abraham here. This is 130 years after the Tower of Babel. Just this generation is born. And so we will end that. So what's going to happen is we're going to see in the generation of Ru and Gilgamesh, Shem's son ARPACHSHAD is going to die. Gilgamesh will become the ruler of Uruk. Egypt will have its fourth dynasty, starting with Sneferu. We'll have the pyramid of his son Khufu, and other pyramids. We'll go to the fifth dynasty. And this is when, and I'll talk more about this next time, David Roll and his timeline, this is now when he really sneaks up with the Bible. Because going earlier than this, he follows the relationships with his own dates. And the relationships and the dates can't both be right with the Bible. And so I choose to go with the relationships are right, his dates are wrong, and the Bible dates are right. So that's what I've been presenting. But here's where they all come together. So then Shelah, Arphaxad's son, dies. We have the sixth dynasty, and then SERUG will be the father, will be born to Ruth. So we'll get to all that. But I want to leave you with the book of Habakkuk as we wind down here for today. And I'll go back to that screen there. So Habakkuk 1 verse 5. I just want to pull out some verses to remind us while all this is happening and man's doing his own thing, God is doing things, and God is always constant and faithful with his people. Here are some verses from Habakkuk that are in effect today. Habakkuk 1:5. God says, look among the nations, observe, be astonished, wonder, because I am doing something in your days. You would not believe it if you were told. That is very true today. In fact, I'm finding that to be very true on July 25th of 2021. As stay tuned and we will all see. God is moving even when we don't realize it. So, and that's actually quoted in the New Testament. That was verse 5 of Habakkuk 1. Verse 13 tells us, this is Habakkuk speaking to God. Your eyes are too pure to approve evil, and you cannot look on wickedness with favor. So then Habakkuk wonders what's happening around him. Why do you look with favor on those who deal treacherously? Ever wonder that? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than they? Well, the story's not done yet. God's faithful, it'll play out. But that verse is often misunderstood. Your eyes are too pure to approve evil, cannot look on wickedness with favor. Some people take that to mean God can't look upon evil. I love brethren who love God enough in his purity to think that, but that is a silly statement because evil is not like sunlight to a vampire with God. It's not like evil shows up, he's like, oh my gosh, I can't look at it. No, he's God. Nothing's a threat to him. What this means is that evil can't stand in his presence. That's the difference. And he will not approve evil. He will not look on it with favor. It will not stand in the presence of a pure, holy, hallowed, almighty God. Chapter 2, verse 3. The vision is yet for the appointed time, hastens toward the goal. It will not fail. Though it tarries, wait for it. There's that patience, Brother Riley. For it will certainly come and will not delay. What God promises will happen. Wait for it. Trust it. Verse 4. Behold, as for the proud one, his soul is not right within him, but the righteous will live by his faith. That's quoted a lot in the New Testament. 14. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Can't wait for that day to happen. Let's close in chapter 3, last 3 verses. 17. Though the fig tree should not blossom. Habakkuk 3:17. Though the fig tree should not blossom, and there be no fruit on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail, and the fields produce no food, though the flock should be cut off from the fold, there be no cattle in the stalls. Brother Riley sounds like he's saying, though there be top ramen instead of steaks. Verse 18. Yet I will exult in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and he has made my feet like hinds' feet and makes me walk on the high places. That's for the choir director on stringed instruments. He's basically saying, Lord, your blessings in my life had made me like those mountain goats that walk on those really narrow ledges that are really high up. I don't fall because you make me to walk by your grace and to survive and to thrive. So even though I might not have these other things, I've got you. And Lord, you are enough. That is the life we are blessed to live as his people today. In our personal life with him, in our households, and especially in this household together. Any final thoughts, comments, questions on today's class and discussion? If not, enjoyed it very much. We'll go ahead and stop here. So we'll stop the share and stop the recording, and we will